This is the Your Career Story podcast, and you're listening to episode 32, the questions no one asks in an interview, but should. Welcome to Your Career Story podcast, a show that's designed for rockstar professionals looking for that extra booster shot of confidence in their careers. Whether you're trying to get clarity on a job transition, want some work-life balance inspiration, or need a strategy to snag that promotion or raise, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Jenna Viviano, ex-Wall Streeter turned startup junkie who now coaches hundreds of clients, empowering them to take back control of the job search and land their dream job. So sit back, grab a glass of wine, and prepare yourself for your weekly boost of career confidence. Welcome back, fam. We are back for another week, and it is already mid-December. Can anyone else believe that? I feel like since I came back from Thanksgiving, I went straight from Thanksgiving and flew out to Santa Barbara, where I did some coursework for LinkedIn Learning that's going to be live next year. And I'm just like, how are we already midway through December? I don't know about you, but I've spent a lot of time reflecting on this past year and reflecting on all the things that I'm really just grateful for that I've accomplished in my workplace. So celebrating myself, but also just grateful for the things that I feel like God has given to me. And so I would love if I could give the opportunity just to share with you some of those things that happened to me. And just also as an encouragement for you to reflect on your own years and see the ways in which your life has progressed. And then also I think it's important for us to identify what are some things that maybe we want to change in 2020. I know for me, the biggest thing that I want to change is creating more work-life separation. And I'm going to be talking about that in the new year, about why I'm doing that, how I'm doing that. I've just realized I'm kind of a workaholic and I don't love that about myself. And I don't want to be passing that on to my kids eventually down the road. And anyways, all of that to say, I'm very grateful for this year, but also realize that there are some things that I need to shift and change, as I'm sure you probably realize as well. So some of the things as I was reflecting back on my year, and I love end of year journaling. I love spending some time, some quiet time, really just evaluating what my past year has looked like. That remembrance is a very, very important word in my world. And if I don't remember things, I will, strive and strain and feel like I can't accomplish anything. But if I take a second to remember and be grateful for the things that have happened, I can realize that, hey, a lot more can happen as well. So some of the things that I'm really, really grateful for that happened this year was the number one thing was meeting my boyfriend, Brent. He is amazing. And if some of you have listened to my story before, I'm singleness and how it's been a huge part of my story and how I was very over being single. And just in the nick of time before my 30th birthday, I met him and fell in love and all the wonderful things. So he's probably the number one thing that I'm grateful for this year, which kind of makes sense. So that's from a personal perspective, but from a professional perspective, looking back on my year, I had some really awesome relationships that I got to build with the people over at LinkedIn and LinkedIn Learning. I was given an awesome opportunity to produce this course for them for some new product lines that they're opening, and then just build some relationships with those people. And I've gotten to continue to work with them over the past year. I've flown out to Santa Barbara, I think it's now 3 times. And hopefully we'll be getting to do more of that in the next year. And that's just been such a fun time for me. And I'm just very grateful for that opportunity. And that's one of those things where when I talk about networking, I really think networking is planting seeds and watching where God grows things. And so I was just constantly connecting with people. I was doing the work, putting in the effort, showing up every day. And God was the one who really made those things grow, in my personal opinion. LinkedIn reached out to me. I did not reach out to them, but I have been doing the work in the forefront to really make those things happen, to show that I was qualified to even teach something in the first place. So that's just an encouragement for you, is it is okay to plant certain seeds and just wait for certain things to sprout up. I think that when I operate in my business that way, and my strategic thinking that way, it actually is a much peaceful way to operate in life. And so hopefully that's an encouragement to you. The other thing I'm grateful for is that my sister actually moved to Nashville. So back on the personal side of things, we are 5 years apart and she's 5 years younger than me. And so we never really lived much of life together, right? I was a senior in high school and she was still in middle school. We lived very different lives. And so it has been honestly one of my favorite things about this year is having her local, having her spend time with Brent, having her just be a part of my life, which we really haven't been able to do as adults. It's more been weekend trips or holidays. And she's awesome. My sister is amazing. And I've just really loved getting to know her as an adult and just proud of the woman that she's becoming. So for me, that's another thing that I'm reflecting on And then finally, two things professionally that I want to touch on is really making the effort to grow my team. So I hired Sarah Crane. Some of you guys who listened to a couple weeks ago, the episode about the holiday gift guide, I had Sarah on to talk about her things that she would love to give for a holiday, for gift giving or whatever that may look like in your office. And hiring her was one of the best decisions that I made in my business. It's a really scary thing. If you're an entrepreneur and you're listening to this, you know that it's really scary to spend your money and delegate out tasks. I actually didn't have a problem with the delegating out of tasks. I was more fearful of will I have enough money to do the things that I want to do in my business, reinvest in my business, and have money left over for myself if I hire her. And can I tell you, I wish I would have done it sooner. And I wish I'm going to continue to build out what that team looks like in 2020. That's a really, really big goal that we have in order to actually be effective and do the work that we're supposed to be doing. And then the last piece is this podcast and you listeners. This was kind of just something that I did on a whim. And I love listening to podcasts myself. And I thought, I wonder what it would be like for me to use this type of medium platform in my business. I was kind of tired of writing blog posts all the time. I felt like they were antiquated. And I was just tired of honestly writing. And since writing is one of actually the things that I want to be passionate about, or I am typically passionate about, I realized that I was writing myself into the ground, and that podcast might be a different medium to teach people that maybe couldn't afford my services, or eventually show them why they need to be a part of working together so I can help them get that transformation. So that has been a crucial part of my business. So for those of you that have thought about doing, this doesn't even apply to if you want to start a podcast. It could be starting anything. In the very beginning of when I started this podcast, I had no listeners. Nobody was listening, but I showed up again every day, kept planting those seeds, and knew that the diligence would pay off, and it has. I've in the thousands of downloads. I've gotten awesome guests on my show. It's helped introduce me to new people. So my encouragement to you in that is when you're reflecting on your year, think about the project that you didn't start that you wish you would have. And you didn't because you were afraid that no one was going to show up. And it is okay to start with those humble beginnings. Humble beginnings are what helps catapult us forward, because if we can be responsible with the small things, we're going to be responsible with the big things. I think too many of us and I'm an impatient person, so I'm not shaming you on this, but too many of us can get impatient in the process. And part of the journey is the process, it's not the end result. Because oftentimes what I see with people when they do get the end result, they realize that wasn't the hit that they really needed, or that wasn't the thing. They're going to always be looking for the next thing. So if you can enjoy the process and be okay with the small beginnings, you're going to be a lot more productive and proactive and successful in life. So now that I'm off of that soapbox, I would love to hear what you are grateful for this year, or what you're proud of that you were able to accomplish. So bonus points if it relates to your work, also bonus points if it relates to your personal life. Both things are really important and make up who we are as whole people. So make sure that you message me on LinkedIn and tell me what you're learning. Tell me what you learned from this podcast episode today, but also tell me what you're grateful for. I love hearing those stories. I love sharing those stories. It encourages me. It keeps us going here over at Viviano Media, because that's technically the name of my company, FYI. But yeah, it's just been an awesome year. 2019 has been such a growth year for me, and I'm just anticipating some big things for 2020 and hopefully being able to serve you guys better. So thank you to all of you that have been listening. Let's hop into the actual nitty gritties of this episode today. So we're talking all about interviews. And the reason why I found that this topic was very, very important was because I've gotten so many questions from people about how do you interview and how do you find the right culture fit? And so I think that there's a couple of misconceptions that we need to break down and talk through before we talk through the specific questions that you should ask in an interview. So a lot of times today, where the buzzword is what's the culture like at your organization? Or that phrase gets asked a lot or thrown around a lot, and people want to work for a really good culture. The problem is culture is not unanimous. It's not a unanimous term. It doesn't apply to everyone in the same way. Some people love the corporate culture. They love the idea of jumping up from ladder to ladder and having that progression route. That is a good culture for them. Feedback culture is a good culture for them. Myself, I would die in that culture. That was not the culture for me that I wanted to be a part of. And so I really enjoyed being a part of the Muse because it was a really small, scrappy company and I loved building it. I didn't love it as much when it became more of a corporate-like in the sense that it had lots more structures and we couldn't be nimble and I couldn't move laterally between. It was more selfishly on my end. They're doing amazing and they need to do that in order to grow. But for me and my personal perspective, I couldn't be a part of that culture. Simultaneously, some people couldn't be part of a startup culture because it is so kind of all over the place. You really have to be the right type of person and right culture fit. So when you're in interviews, your job is not only to answer the interview questions quote unquote correctly or honestly, your job is to make sure you want to be there. And so a lot of us forget that at the same time as we're being interviewed, we need to interview the interviewer. And do not be shamed of asking really bold questions or asking very direct questions as long as you contextualize it. Remember, it's never what you say, it's how you say it. And I'm going to teach you some ways to make sure that you're asking those hard questions that you want to know the answers to without becoming off-putting, because there is a fine line there and I want to make sure that you don't do it. The other thing is that I'm really hating in today's day and age is that because culture has become a buzzword, more and more companies are catching on, which is a good thing in some instances because they're realizing what's valuable to employees and they want to get good talent. But on the other end of the spectrum, it's kind of become a marketing game. So companies spend thousands, if not millions of dollars on talent acquisition every single year, probably in the millions, especially for large corporations. So half of their budget, or not half of it, but a lot of their budget is going towards marketing specifically to you and what they call employer branding. They specifically have a whole line of work called branding the employer brand. So they have their consumer facing brand and then they have their employer brand. And they dump a lot of money into that. And what that can be is a good thing, right? If they're really producing employee engagement programs, that's awesome. But oftentimes what I'm finding, and this is really disheartening to me, it can feel like you're actually being duped once you get into the organization. Because at the end of the day, a culture is not based off of some value. It is kind of based off of values and belief structures and what your mission is. Those things are really important and help build a little bit of a foundation. But at the end of the day, culture is made up by people. And culture is really made up in the subdivisions or departments in which you're working in. So while your culture of your company may say that they are all about some mission related thing and work-life balance, if your specific boss and your team does not align with that, that's going to be a problem for you because you think that you're going in assuming that the whole culture is like that, but realizing as soon as you get in, hey, this manager does not sing to that tune. And that's where I'm seeing a lot of people get tripped up. So the goal of this episode is really to help you ask those poignant questions, to get to the root, to get to understand if the subculture that you're going to be entering into is the right culture for you. Again, you have to first decide, what does culture mean to you? What's most important to you? For everybody that's going through my Recruit the Employer program, I have them do this sheet called the What Do You Want sheet. And there's some questions in there that help us get really, really clear on what are the things that are actually important to you, not what society tells you are important. So some people, I think we've been sold the lie that ping pong tables make a company have great culture. No, people make great culture. And so it's really understanding what's your leadership style that you admire. What type of environment do you want to be a part of? And every single one of my clients is very different. It is not the exact same thing across the board. So you have to first get super crystal clear on what you care about. And then from there, you're going to be able to ask questions that are most relevant. So for myself, perfect example, when I was applying to different jobs, when I was leaving the New York Stock Exchange, I had an interview and was interviewing at a really big tech company. When I actually got in there and started interviewing, I realized that it was a bunch of JP Morgan ex-banker guys that ended up moving to a tech company. And it felt like a bank where I was interviewing at. And that just wasn't comfortable to me. I was trying to get out of that environment. I didn't want to be a part of that culture. Even though it was safe, they would pay me a lot of money. I was going to be able to move out of New York City pretty quickly and sidestep into a profession that I wanted to sidestep into. The problem was it just wasn't the culture I wanted to be a part of. I didn't want to be a part of a bank anymore, or that banking type culture where it was a very bro-y environment. And so I found this little tiny startup called The Muse, which had 2 female founders, and it was very nimble and it was kind of risky. And I could wear my regular clothes to work. That ironically was actually important to me. And I had somebody who I was interviewing with at that big organization kind of make fun of me for that. I can't believe you would pick a company because you can wear normal clothes every day. For me, that was important. And I didn't want to feel ashamed for that because it all mixed into the whole environment in general. And I wanted to be a part of a more casual environment. And so that was important. So do not let somebody tell you that your desires or your things that you really want are unreasonable. Now, if you have too many of those things matched together, there's no unicorn company, just like there's no unicorn candidate. So just remember that. But ultimately, don't be discouraged if somebody kind of makes fun of you for that, because that happened to me and I still went with my gut and it was the right decision. Interviewing can be really intimidating, especially at the end of the conversation. What do you say when they ask you, "So, do you have any questions for me?" You don't want to say, nothing, all good here. But you also don't want to pull out your notebook and say, actually, I have about 20 questions I'd like to discuss with you regarding this opportunity. It's definitely a delicate balance of asking the right questions to get to the heart of the company and impress the hiring manager. So I want to help you master this, friends. Head on over to www.jennaviviano.com/interview questions for my free guide to crushing your interview. In this guide, I will teach you how to ask questions that will get to the bottom of what the culture actually is like, not just what it says on Glassdoor. I want to help you unearth exactly what you'll be doing on a day-to-day basis in this new gig. And I'm going to help you understand if you and this new manager will actually enjoy working together. And I am going to make you look like an absolute boss. Again, if you know that you're going to have an interview coming up, you need to snag this guide. It is totally free, and it's going to clear up a lot of confusion you have prior to your interview. So head on over to www.jennaviviano.com/interview questions to get the questions you should be asking in an interview. There is no one good company to work for. There's lots of lists out there that indicate like what are the best companies to work for in certain XYZ city, or maybe it's in the country or the fastest growing companies, whatever that may look like. You have to remember, and what a lot of people don't realize, is a lot of those companies pitch themselves to those publications. And so while I do believe that there is authority to those publications and they do their due diligence as best as they can, they obviously don't know what the subculture looks like. So it is your responsibility then when you get into that interview to be confident and ask those questions. It's a mindset shift that we have to get into, that we are valuable in the work that we do. So we also deserve to be valued in our workplace in the way that we want to be valued, and to hold true to those things. Too many of my clients, when they come in starting to work with me, are what I call bottom feeders. That sounds really graphic and kind of mean, but if I'm honest, that's how they approach their career. They're just waiting for something to drop down and to eat it and move on to the next thing. Instead, I want you to be like a shark at the top of the water. I want you to be somebody who realizes you're gifted, you're talented, you have something to offer to an organization, and you are going to be proactive in your career, not waiting for something to drop and be reactive. It's a mental shift that you have to make in order to be a person that's going to find what they actually want to do and be a part of an organization that's going to fit your personal, quote unquote, good culture, right? Hopefully this is making sense for you, but it's definitely that mindset shift. And by the time that my clients are done working with me, they realize their worth and their value, and they have confidence in themselves again and are not afraid to ask those questions and be bold because they know that they deserve it. So you have to do some inner work on yourself if you feel like you do not deserve to ask certain questions, because you are immediately, before you even get your offer letter or step in on your first day, you are giving them all the power. And I am not for that. I am not for your employer having all the power. Do we need to respect them? Do we need to honor that? Do we need to be loyal? Yes, all those things are true. And also, you can be valued as well. So here's some questions that I would recommend asking the hiring manager, so AKA your boss, or somebody else on your team. I'm going to go through quite a few questions that are going to help you throughout this process. Also, guys, I'm sitting on a squeaky chair. So if you can hear it, I'm sorry. One of the first things that I have people ask as it relates to culture is asking, instead of like, what's the culture like? That's a terrible question. Don't ever ask that question because it's so generic and everyone asks it. Your goal in an interview is to differentiate yourself. The question you should ask, and I would recommend getting out a piece of paper. If you're driving, save it for later, because I know some of you are driving. Don't you dare text and drive. Don't you dare write these things down while you're driving. The question I would ask is, what's one thing you would change about the culture? That is a great question to ask because it allows them the opportunity to think about it and actually provide something that's interesting for them to provide something that's actually going to be truthful, right? So if somebody asks you what the culture is like, they're going to be like, well, you should already know that, it's on the website, right? By asking them what they would change about the culture, it's engaging, it's interactive, and you're actually going to get something that you can understand. Is this really a place that I want to call home? Another question you can ask are, what opportunities are there for professional development? So the number one thing that people come to me for is when they're switching jobs, they feel like their company hasn't invested in them and they want a new challenge. They want to grow. They want to change. And when companies don't do that, you're going to be discontent really, really quickly. And so by asking this question, you can see, does this company invest in personal development for their employees? And AKA, do I want to be part of this company? And then I would follow up and say, can you give me an example of you or someone else at the company that this has benefited them? Right? So it's asking them for a specific example, so they can't just tell you, yeah, we have professional development opportunities. They have to get specific about the examples that they give where this has been exemplified in the workplace. So the problem with a lot of people is when they ask questions, they're often yes/no questions, when really you need to dig a little bit deeper into that and ask that question: what opportunities are there available? And then can you give me an example of you or someone else who has benefited from that in our company? All right. Third question you can ask is, what does success look like in this position and how do you determine that? This is called a setting expectations question. So the biggest breakdown in communication issues I see are around expectation management. So an employee will accept a position, they expect it to look one way, and then the hiring manager actually expects it to look a different way. You need to get crystal clear about what does success look like in this position and if you are capable of doing the things that they're going to be wanting you to do, or quite frankly, if you want to do the things. If you're going to be the queen of putting out fires and you don't want to put out fires anymore, I'm talking to somebody right now, I'm preaching to you. You absolutely do not need to take that position. Just because you're qualified to put out fires does not mean you need to put out fires. Right? So asking the question of what does success look like in this position, asking them to be very specific about what that means and how you're going to be evaluated, because you want to know upfront, like, what's the end goal? What's the result that I need to produce for you? Do I want to produce that result? Right? It's also going to give you an idea of what the culture is like. If they're asking you to do a bunch of different things, you're probably going to be a little bit overworked, right? Another question you can ask, and this one's a little bit more on the bold side, so you have to be very, very careful. Let me preface again. If you ask this question, you have to be very, very careful with how you phrase it. But let's say you're hopping on Glassdoor and you notice they have a lot of bad reviews about a very specific subject, maybe. Maybe it's like no one likes the CEO. I'm just using an example. And you want to bring that up in the interview. I wouldn't necessarily recommend bringing it up for the hiring manager. Instead, I would bring it because they're in a subculture, right? So they're the subculture. I would ask this to the HR or recruiter. This is a question that's more directed towards them. And I would say, this is kind of awkward to ask this question, and I don't want to put salt in a wound, but I was reviewing your Glassdoor reviews, and I noticed there was a lot of people who have left that commented on the CEO's XYZ issues. Can you comment on that at all? It feels uncomfortable, right? Like you're probably already squirming, being like, I could never ask that question. Here's the thing. Companies know that Glassdoor is either going to make or break their experience. So it's not going to be shocking to them that you bring up a bad review. Now, I would never ask this question if there's like one bad review. If it's a very consistent theme about a very specific thing, you want to know, is this a place that I want to be a part of? And if they can't handle you asking that question, then it's probably not a culture you want to be a part of anyways, right? And by asking it, saying like, hey, I'm prefacing this is going to be an uncomfortable question. I recognize that. I'm not trying to be rude. I just want to be doing my due diligence, as I'm sure you can understand. And you did when you accepted this position. I noticed on your Glassdoor reviews that blank, blank, blank. So providing that context, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? Another question that you can ask for a hiring manager is, can you give me an example of a project or team your team is working on and how you delegate out tasks? So what I'm trying to do with this question is understand, are they a micromanager, right? You want to know upfront if you're going to be working with a micromanager and whether you want to opt in or opt out. If the work is good enough for you, exciting enough for you to opt in, that's fine. But you want to be aware of what you're walking into as much as possible. And so by asking to them to give an example of a project your team is working on and how they delegated tasks, you're going to see how they're going to lead. You can ask a very, very similar question by asking somebody that's on their team and say, can you give me an example of a project your manager that you were working on and your manager had to delegate tasks to? Can you explain like what his process is or what her process is, right? How do you delegate tasks? It's going to give you a good idea of if they're a micromanager or not. Another question you can ask is, this is also to the hiring manager, is when was the last time you listened to an employee's idea and let them run with it? It's going to also give you an idea. Are they a micromanager? How are they going to lead? Do I want them to work with me? Are they promoting their employees? Do they encourage them? Do they give them free rein, or are they being really controlling? You're going to be able to tell by how they answer this. Now, they could flat out lie to you and be a total salesperson, and that's really unfortunate. And there's really nothing I can do to tell you to get around that other than to get really good at asking these questions and be really discerning in your spirit. You know when somebody's BSing you. It's whether you want to believe it or not. And so I would really recommend asking this question because it really helps you see, how do they lead? How do they manage people? How do they value people on their team? And it's a really great question in general. And if they don't want to be challenged on that, again, you don't want to work for them. If they don't want to receive feedback, they're not going to be good for you. All right. I would ask another question that this you can ask to pretty much anybody, whether they're recruiting or they're your hiring manager or someone on your potential team, is what's different about working here than anywhere else you've worked? This is a really fun question because it allows you to build rapport with that person and say, hey, I've noticed that you worked at Amazon, and now you work at Facebook. What's the different about working here versus there? And then you can see the compare and contrast. So again, this is a better question, like what's the culture like? It's actually giving them some frame of reference and a different way of asking that question to get the same answer out of them. That's not the generic, well, we have happy hours and we do go on company retreats and blah, 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 blah. You can actually see what's different about working there by them making that contrast. Another question that you can ask, and this is also a really, really bold question, so I apologize in advance if you hate this idea, is asking the question and saying, without saying any names, who is your favorite and least favorite manager and why? I love this question because if you're asking this to somebody that could potentially be like lateral to you on your same level, you can see, do they mention your current manager, right? Also, at the same time, you can see if it's a manager, how they're going to answer this and see what they value, right? So if you're going to be your manager and they say that their favorite manager was somebody that you worked with at XYZ company, and they're going to say, these are the reasons why I loved working with them. That's going to indicate to you what type of manager they're hoping to be, potentially, right? Do birds of a feather flock together? Yes, typically, but sometimes obviously there is somebody who's not going to follow the ways of their predecessor. Predecessor, right word? Yeah, predecessor. And so just make sure that when you're asking this question to not pressure them to give you names, but just to give them an idea of who your least and favorite manager is. Again, this is a differentiated question. No one is asking this. It's something that's different and interesting, and it actually builds conversation and rapport. And then this is a question to get really specific. You can ask this to somebody that's on your team that would have the same manager as you, is what 3 words would you use to describe your manager's style? So instead of asking them, how is your manager, or how do you like working with your manager? They're not going to say anything bad, right? They're just not going to. If they are, that's very impressive. They feel very confident in their job security than if they do. Typically, people will lie, right? But what you can tell, oftentimes if people are lying, is how the words that they use to describe their manager's style. If it does not come to them quick, typically, they're probably having an issue with their employer. Now, that's not always the case, but I have just found that when I'm asking a question that's similar to this and they can't think on their feet and don't have anything that comes to mind, like if I love my manager, I could tell you 3 things about them really quickly about what I love about working with them. When I worked at the New York Stock Exchange, David was my manager and he was amazing. If someone asked me this question in an interview, I would say he's decisive, he requires excellence, and he knows each of us very individually. And I love working with him because of that, right? I would say each one of those 3 things, I worked with him years ago and I could tell you that, right? So if somebody is not giving you an answer or a straightforward answer, you probably know that your manager may be a little funky funks and maybe people don't like working with him. And then finally, the last question you absolutely need to ask that people get a little wimpy about, or ask and they don't ask it in a confident way, is what are the next steps in the interview process? You deserve to know what happens next. Now, does every company know exactly what's going to happen or in how many weeks they should have a process down, but as we know, the process gets completely blown out of the water depending on how many candidates they bring in, how many interviews they're doing, and organize everybody's schedule internally. So I want you just to be thinking about what those steps are looking like and if you want to be a part of it. That may sound harsh, but I've had some clients where they're like, actually, this job, I wasn't really excited about this interview. And they're telling me the next steps are that I have to create this whole case study and I have to do all these things. I really am going to bow out now. And that's okay to do. I've done that myself with an interview. I was actually interviewing with WeWork a long time ago before all their kerfuffling that they've been going through right now. And I was in the 3rd round interview. I did the case study and I loved doing the case study. It was super fun for me. And then afterwards, I was really thinking about it. I was like, I just really do not want to do this job. Like the case study was fun for me, but the idea, it was a very travel heavy job. I was like, I know myself. I don't want to do that. And so I respectfully declined and bowed out. And it was okay because I knew the next stage in the process was I'm going to have to meet people in person. And I was like, I'm not going to waste people's time. I'm not going to do that. So for you, asking that question is not only to see like, do I want to be a part of it, but it's also to see like, what is next? What can I expect? How can I manage my life based off of this? And as best as you can, right? So these are the questions that I would recommend asking that are a little bit deeper and get a little bit more into what's the culture like of an organization? Do I actually want to work here? And being proud to ask those questions. Do not be embarrassed asking those questions, because quite frankly, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. All right, guys, I hope that this was really helpful. We actually have our last episode coming up next week for the year of our season 3. And it's about dealing with a micromanager. So we talked about a couple of those things in this episode today, but I am really excited to go into this because we've all had a micromanager sometime in our life. And I'm going to teach you some tools that I've taught other people how to deal with that and how to manage it and how to manage up as well. So we will see you next week on the podcast episode. And right after that, we have a really fun special gift for you guys. I'm really excited about it. All right, guys, I will talk to you later. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for listening to Your Career Story podcast. I would love to get to meet you. And there are a couple of ways that we can connect in between episodes. First and foremost, I love my LinkedIn. Second is via Instagram. And third is over on my website. I actually have a special spot just for you full of fun, free resources. So all you have to do is go to www.jennaviviano.com/resources. Super simple, for a bunch of freebies that will help you boost your career. Hope to see you next week.